All right, good morning, everyone. I'm going to do a second video that I'm going to start right now. I used to spend, when I was a child, I would watch Saturday morning cartoons. When I'm an adult, I make cartoons about data for YouTube. So I'm not sure if that's progress, but it gives me something to do. So here is the data update, and I think I did get the date right. And I want the data on Delta transmission. I want the take-home message to be right up front because I know people don't have time to watch the whole thing. Vaccines have risk for even the hardest parts to reduce, which is cases and transmission. This is an estimate, especially for transmission, and so it might be modified in the future. But I have a big study from the UK with the Delta wave that says vaccinated people got less Delta COVID in real life by about 50 to 60%. Viral loads were also less in vaccinated people, reducing the odds of transmission, it looks like, by about 50 to 60%. The viral loads issue is a tricky one because it's based on RT-PCR, which is honestly a technique that I'm not very good at. They run controls, and so the yes-no on RT-PCR is actually very robust. But the quantity on it is another stretch, and you don't want to base too much on it. Unfortunately, there's some very prominent voices in the public eye that have based a lot on cherry-picked studies that were about viral loads that I simply do not trust. Let me show you the study I do trust. It's a React study. It's one of the UK is really good at doing these big studies. And one just came out for 24 June to 12 July, which means Delta time for the UK. And here's the take home right there. Double vaccinated people were less likely than unvaccinated people to test positive after coming into contact with someone who had COVID-19. 3% versus 7%. 3.5 versus 7.2. You get it, about half. So it looks like they're half as likely to even test positive. And this is not severe disease. This is not what the vaccines are really designed to go against. They're designed to prevent you from dying, not to prevent you from ever getting this RNA in your system. But the question does come up. If you have the viral RNA in your system, can you pass it on to others? And the answer is technically yes, but practically speaking, what should we be worried about? And this is where we get to the communication issue. My general rule for all these things is say it's about halved and you'll probably be right. The thing is, if you say it's about halved and it's cut in 1/3 or it's cut in 2/3 or whatever, you'll be about right and you'll be able to say I was right later. And that's what I'm saying right here. That's what I would have said before you showed me the data. And that's what it ends up actually being pretty close to about 50% for all these different measures that they're talking about. Transmission, infection. Okay, slightly different things and difficult to measure in real life. Infection's easy to measure, but transmission is difficult because where did you get it from? The virus is too small to see. It floats around in aerosol particles that you just breathe in without knowing it. And then there's some viruses that probably infect your system. The vaccine, your immune system takes care of it if it's been educated by the vaccine, or sometimes maybe if not. Your immune system even takes care of cancer that you never know about. There's so many things assaulting your body every day, and your immune system is a shield against them. It's very good at its job, and it's very good at remembering the vaccine. And so that's why what I expected it to be probably about a 2 to 3-fold help in any situation, even against the hardest situations. And it's about a 95% help, 1 in 20. What would that be? A 20-fold help against severe disease. So that's why I'm saying let's keep this in perspective. So what am I really talking about here? I'm talking about scientific communication. And as a scientist with a PR degree, and yes, I do have a PR degree, I can say you can do one of those internet things. Scare me with 2 words, okay? If you want to scare me with 2 words, cold fusion. Because I remember when cold fusion came out, it looked like it was going to solve our entire energy crisis. And I was a budding chemistry student at the time. I was really excited about the fact that we chemists might have figured out fusion and basically have limitless energy from water. It turned out to be not replicatable. Other scientists couldn't do it. And the thing about cold fusion, the whole reason why I heard about it was because the scientists went to the press release before they published their data, before they let other scientists even look at their data and peer review it, much less try to replicate it. And there were all these great stories about cold fusion, like they left it overnight and the machine exploded, and they said it's because it was making so much energy. But they were never able to replicate that. They were never able to explode the machine again. They were never able even to heat it up to boiling temperature. So I really doubt that the exploding machine was a real story, but it would make a good tweet, right? This is why I don't trust press releases and why I don't trust going to the press before you show me the data. Okay? So this is science by press release, and I actually have another example of it. Arsenic Life is another example of it, and in fact, this is so ingrained in me that I used Arsenic Life as my opening example in my book that I wrote about chemistry and evolution. So chapter 1 of A World from Dust has a really cool story about Arsenic Life where scientists went to the press before they went to full replication and peer review. Arsenic Life is not quite as bad as cold fusion, but it was more relevant to the topic of my book. And actually, when I look at it, it's pretty bad. So we talk about this with my students. I won't get into the details, but scientists should be showing other scientists their data before they go to the press. And this gets to my problem with the CDC, because the CDC did science by press release a week ago. They suddenly came out with the recommendation that all vaccinated people wear a mask indoors. And you know what? The mask is not a big deal to me. I know people for whom it's a bigger deal than it is to you, so you better listen to those people, special needs children and things like that. But the thing is, for me, as a vaccinated person, they're like, you should mask up inside. And I'm like, where's the science that really says that? But whatever, that's my attitude. The thing that they really said was not really the masking recommendation. They can recommend what they want. I'll look at the data and I'll decide what to take for the recommendation. But they repeated the statement, vaccinated people may transmit as much as unvaccinated. When I hear the word may, number one, that's a weasel word. It's a weasel word that scientists use all the time. But you can always go back and said, I only said may. And so it's a word that we have to use as scientists. You'll see me using it. But also, if you're trying to recommend something for the whole country, I want you to have more data than may. And I want you to show me the data. They didn't even have the data when they made the recommendation. They said the data's unpublished. And then a few days later, they leaked a slide deck. They leaked it to the New York Times, and they said that it included some of the data. And the New York Times did what the press is going to do. They're going to say, we have an exclusive. We're going to play this up as much as possible. So they played it up as much as possible. Then it got to the scientific community, and the scientific community was like, well, okay, there's a little bit of something going on there, but that's not that bad, and that's not that representative, and, what's going on here? The science community did not react like the reporters at the New York Times did. And of course, the reporters at the New York Times were self-interested. So you've got to look out for all these dynamics with the press releases and things like that. Now, the CDC is in a really tough position because we're a very divided country. But the way to get out of that tough position is to appeal to reality. Science and data can still be debated, but it's a lot harder to dispute, and it gives you a firmer ground to stand on. So when they said, we'll show you the data later, my alarm bells went off that I don't know if this data is really that good. Now, the data is there, and it does seem to say what they say it seems. But there's really only one or two papers, especially about the vaccinated people may transmit as much. And there's been a ton of literature about the previous things showing that they don't transmit it much. It was a question when the first vaccine first came out, and it was answered. And we were very slow to accept the data that showed that it worked for the original strain and for Alpha. And now we're with Delta, and we're like, do we have to go back to the drawing board? Here's my other rule of thumb. Look at the number of mutations. Delta does have mutations that would reasonably cause more binding, would reasonably cause more transmission. I believe that that's coming from a real place. But it doesn't have enough mutations to make it into a whole new virus. It doesn't have nearly enough mutations to evade the immune system, especially not my favorite cellular immunity T cells. The thing is, those protect against severe disease, those don't protect as well against infection, And so we're going to get some infections. So the idea that a Delta strain would come out that would be more transmissible and more infective, but the vaccines are still working against it. And like I said, it seems like we now are 2 to 3 times as good as opposed to previously we were like 10 times as good or something like that. Still good. And let me make one more point that's really important. Basing everything on viral loads is a reductionist, complete breaking the system down and going after one particular aspect of the system. So even if you show me a paper that's measured the viral loads being the same in vaccinated versus unvaccinated, I have a lot of questions. How did you get that sample? How different are they really? And did you run your PCR right? You know, PCR is not easy to run. And that's not to say that doesn't result in false positives, I want to reiterate, but that does make CT values difficult to compare. Sometimes they'll fluctuate. There's a lot of noise in them. And I can talk about the reasons for that if you're interested. But the main thing is, even if all of these are same, and we go for these couple of studies that say that in this one situation, they measured 20 people and they found out that viral loads were the same, vaxxed and unvaxxed. Even so, I do not accept that as evidence that transmission is the same. Because for these reasons, here's a scientist that I follow, a very good scientist to listen to, by the way. I've quoted her before. And vaccinated people are likely to have, vaccines will also reduce not just viral loads, but there's a lot of other things in viral loads that go into transmission. Virus shedding time, the symptoms that you have, the presence of the immune response. If the viruses are coated with antibodies, even if you have the same load, they're not going to be as effective. And that's what antibodies do. Now, I don't know what is the point, what's enough antibodies to do that, how does it affect, but it's going to bring it down. And that's the main thing that I'm going to see. You've got to show me more than a couple of viral load papers with questionable study practices and questionable applications to convince me that transmission is suddenly for Delta exactly the same for vaxxed and unvaxxed as it was when we've already also got real life data that it's reduced for the other ones. And I have the real life data in the UK study. Again, it's difficult to measure in real life, but it sure looks to me like it's at least 2 to 3-fold better. What does that even, so does that mean masks or not? It pushes me more towards saying that you should be careful when you recommend for the whole country that vaccinated people need to mask up. What's the good that's going to be done? And it is a low cost, but it's not a zero cost endeavor. And especially for some people, you know, if you have an autistic child who rips their mask off, and yet and they're less at risk from COVID because they're a child, you know, all that's still true. And so we've got to find a way to balance instead of focusing on one aspect like a laser and going to the press with that one aspect. Scientists are trained to look at data, look at limitations, and make these inferences. That's what I got a PhD in. It's in an adjacent area, but it allows me to at least look at this and also to hear the ring of truth when I hear another scientist making what sounds like a reasonable critique. The other question is, what about long COVID? And this, you know, I can say even less about this, right? Because long COVID requires a long study to study it. And it requires, I'm a molecular guy. Where's your molecular signature for long COVID? It's going to take a long time to develop that. So I'm troubled by the reports I get of people who have had lingering symptoms. We're collecting data on it right now. Maybe this one right here suggests to me, I mean, this is a real big estimate, but maybe we have 1/5 of a million self-reported severe cases in the UK. That's out of a nation of 60 million people. That is scary. But the thing is, the other 59.8 million people, what should they do to help the 200,000 people that are having this? And even if they do something, like if they keep the kids home from school, will it really affect this? You know, it might keep a few kids from developing it. And this is adults. There's been a good study about kids in long COVID that suggests that long COVID is at most about 1% of children. It does appear to be a severe problem for some children. People are very different and diverse on the inside. And so we're going to find people that have immune system problems, find people that can't defend themselves against it. But we've got to measure. Again, the cold fusion anecdote of the exploding machine. Very dramatic story. Will get a lot of retweets on Twitter. And life is made up of stories. But as a scientist, I've got to take these stories, and keeping in mind, each of these patients is an individual story and is a suffering. But we've got to put that against all the other students, the 59.8 million people who are not reporting this right now. What should they do? What should doctors do? What should we do to be able to give people sick leave so that they can stay home if they have symptoms? You know, there's all sorts of societal questions, and this gets beyond my biochemistry training. But I'm going to recognize that, and I'm going to point out where I've seen the data, and that's why I'm going to say, if you say, what about this, what about that, I'm going to say, oh, well, that's a tough problem. How do we measure it? Because we can't measure everything, but measuring gives us a common ground on which to move forward. And that's why I want to move forward from this basis of long COVID. I want to move forward from this basis of vaccines, and I really wish that the statement, the vaccinated person may transmit, I would like that to say a vaccinated person may transmit about half as much as an unvaccinated. That's the right use of the word may, according to the data that we have right now. We can't use the word may to cherry pick, to take the thing we're scared of and to pull that end of the Gaussian distribution out and say, this is the real problem. The only place where that's valid is when you're dealing with something like people dying, because the Gaussian distribution where people die, but we're preventing that. And then we have a gradation of severity down from that. It's a complicated question. I can't cover it in a YouTube video, but we can cover it by looking for papers and as a scientific community evaluating those papers rigorously. That's what I intend to do. And so probably I'm going to keep doing data updates because we're going to keep having data. We're going to keep having questions. This is my take on it. About half is the take-home message I want you to take. So thanks for listening on this Saturday morning or whatever time it may be for you. This is just my take on the situation, but yeah, let's all get educated together. I wear this Get Educated shirt because it's a reminder to me that I want to get educated as much as anyone else. I want to let the data educate me, and I want to remember that journalists have a really tough job. I went to a college of journalism. I know how tough it is. But journalists have got to realize their own biases and their own self-promotion, and try to take more of a skeptical, statistical, scientific eye when it comes to things like that. And so science communication, I'll keep talking about it. Let's hope that next week is a better week for science communication than this one. And let's hope that, like I saw, let's hope that these Delta waves do break in the States like they have in Western Europe. All right, till then, hopefully I'll make another video in a couple weeks, and we'll see how I do. All right, talk to you then.